As you might recall, earlier this week I sent you a zip file that contained your APR building level scorecard and asked you to download your particular scorecard and save a copy of it. The reason I'm asking you to save a copy of it is because when you make a copy of it, it becomes active. And needs to become active so that you can progress monitor as you get data during this course of the school year, and in addition to that, so that you can set your building SMART goals based on the academic services strategic plan goal of 5% increase in proficiency. So if you will take a look at this particular scorecard, you'll notice that it looks very similar to your APR report that DESE sends at the end of the year. As you might remember, DESE monitors status, which is a 3-year rolling average of your students' proficiency levels in their tested areas, and it also measures progress. And progress is the change in proficiency that happens from year to year over the course of the 3 years that DESE is collecting data on. So for this particular year, you'll notice that we are going to be looking at data from 2018, 2019, and 2021. That will be the average of those 3 years will be your rolling average, and that will establish your status. And the status is going to be in these different ranges, and it will determine what your status measure is on your APR summary report. In addition to that, you'll also get progress. And progress is tied to this 3-year rolling average because it monitors whether or not MPIs are increasing and increasing at what percent, and or if they're not increasing. So what you can do with this active yellow cell to set your SMART goal is you can put different values into the 2021 data cell that is yellow, and it will change your progress. So for example, if I put the exact same value in this scorecard that was achieved in 2018, you can see that the 3-year rolling average becomes a 305. That lands in the approaching category in terms of status, and it achieves less than 1% gain in growth. So you can go back to this cell and you can adjust it, and you can put in a different value and see what is the impact on the progress. That changes to 1%. And then you can continue this until you can see what kind of MPI would be needed to gain a 5% progress in terms of proficiency increases in the tested areas at the high school level. So you'll notice at the very bottom of this particular workbook, there are tabs that go with every monitored area on your APR report. Standard 1 includes all of your students, and as you know, anything that starts with a 2 at the bottom of this workbook is your subgroups, and that's the MPI that will go in for that particular category of your students. In addition, you know that there is the standard 3 that measures college and career readiness, and that data comes from the Starship, and that is generated from data management at TMC, and Melody and I send that out in different intervals based on when they send it to us so that you can progress monitor what students need to take, what tests, and what your percentages are. Lastly, you'll notice on this scorecard that attendance is there. And as you know, we did not receive attendance in 2020. However, we will be receiving attendance in 2021, and it will be the result of in-person seat time for the students. Even if you are in a remote closure, the in-person seat time counts as the calculation for attendance. So it's important while students are in person to be encouraging them to be present and engaged and certainly supported by us. In addition to that, however, they also need to receive that same encouragement if they are in a remote situation. So this is how this scorecard really works. It is relatively simple in the approach. The one or two things that you might have questions about would also be about how do we know the students' proficiencies on the pre-EOCs? Well, we used the 2019 data to develop a proficiency scale that is tied to percentages. And those percentages are simply a function of how many answers or items students get correct and how many they don't. So if we have established that for these particular areas, if your teachers develop their own proficiency correlation to percentages, they may do that. And again, these are gauges to better understand how students are changing or growing as they move from, for example, below basic to basic or basic to proficient and so on. So that is something that the data cycles certainly will help support and encourage. And those data cycles, we talked about those previously. You may be wondering too, how do we calculate an MPI? We talked about this last year, and several of you were acquainted with this. If you were not, just please remember there are three relatively simple steps to calculate a MAP Performance Index or an MPI. And that is, first, you need to know for whatever tested area you may be interested in calculating an MPI for. For example, it could be algebra. You would simply need to know across your building how many of your Algebra 1 students are in below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. And that will give you a total number of reportable students, and it will give you how many students fall into each one of those proficiency levels. Next, you may remember that DESE gives each one of those proficiency levels an index point value. So what would happen next, you would take the index point value, multiply it by the number of students in that particular proficiency level, and ultimately you generate index points. So you would want your total index points for the students in a tested area. Next, you would take that total index point value and you would divide it by the number of reportable students for that content area. That generates this number in this particular calculation. Multiply it by 100, and that is your MPI. For the purposes of your building scorecard, these values will be sent to you for your pre-EOC tested areas. That then you will have one less calculation to do, and it will also give you the MPIs for your subgroups, so that during those 3 different times during the course of the year, you'll know how your students are progressing in their classrooms in terms of their proficiency. You're also going to have an understanding of this through the lens of the common formative assessments and the data cycles that teachers will be doing around those particular assessments. So that gives teachers and students, as well as you, to better understand how things are going for students in terms of their growth, because the growth is what is going to change the proficiency levels, and then in turn you see that in terms of progress on your APR report. If you should have any questions about how to use the scorecard, please let me know. I'm more than happy to talk with you.